well-established processes. Correct? Correct. And it's a beautiful thing, Brian, when the DOJ lawyers are the ones who put the lie to what Donald Trump has been telling the American people. Judge Boasberg knows his way around this judicial thing.
Glenn, you had mentioned that Judge Boasberg is going to get to the point where he's going to consider contempt charges. Is that a certainty right now, or is there some indication that you have by virtue of how he's spoken that suggests that he may move in that direction?
So Judge Boasberg is always very careful when he chooses his words. He's thoughtful, he's circumspect, he does things incrementally to make sure he has evidentiary support for each move he is contemplating taking. So what he said today was, I am not buying your, I'm paraphrasing here based on the reporting, I'm not buying your explanations. In fact, he called some of them, quote, sketchy, close quote. He said, so, if I find there's probable cause that my orders were violated by the Trump administration, I need to know from you, who is it that failed to comply with my orders? For instance, he said, I need to know which Trump administration officials failed to notify the pilots of the planes in the event the planes were in the air. That's still an open question. Some of the planes, it sounds like, hadn't even taken off yet, which is a more egregious violation of his orders not to deport anyone. But he said, I need to know from you exactly which officials are responsible, assuming I find that my orders were violated. Again, he's doing things incrementally, thoughtfully. He wants evidentiary support for each step he takes. But, I can't say it's a certainty because he didn't declare it was a certainty. But based on everything else he said and how he drilled down on all of the facts and the BS explanations that the DOJ lawyers were providing, I mean, he shot them down one after another, including the state secrets nonsense that we can't even tell you what time the plane took off because it was a state secret. Let me tell you how he addressed that, Brian. He said, any of the information about when the planes took off and when they landed and who was on the planes, is any of it classified information? The DOJ lawyers had to concede none of it is classified, Judge. So what did he say next? He said, well then, there is no case law, there is no legal authority, there is no precedent that you can invoke the state secrets doctrine for information that is not classified. I'm telling you, it's such a beautiful thing because the judge was playing chess and the DOJ attorneys were like rummaging around in their game closet looking for a checkerboard to pull out. They weren't even on the playing field. So I can't say it's a certainty. That's a very long run up to this definitive answer. But I'll tell you, everything Judge Boasberg has said and done makes me think that, next stop is contempt.
Glenn, I have to ask, what does it look like when a judge brings a contempt charge against government officials? I mean, are we going to expect them to have to abide by anything that's handed down by this judge?
Yeah, so here's the thing, Brian. The only time a judge has the ability, the lawful ability, to get an independent prosecutor and direct that person to prosecute a criminal charge is when it's contempt of court. That's the one and only time an independent prosecutor is available to a judge to be appointed to move forward in a criminal case. So assuming he goes to criminal contempt and not just civil contempt is generally money fines that are put in place to try to urge the administration, the government officials to do the right thing. That horse has left the barn and those immigrants have left the country. So I suspect we're going to hear more about criminal contempt. So let's talk about what that looks like. So I think this probably qualifies as irony, Brian, because those Venezuelan immigrants who had a constitutional right to due process, meaning they had a right of notice that the government was going to act against them and an opportunity to be heard in court and present evidence as to why the government shouldn't be lawfully allowed to act against them. They were deprived of those constitutionally guaranteed due process rights. But guess what? The Trump administration officials who are responsible for violating the court's orders, they're going to enjoy their constitutional rights of notice and opportunity to be heard. And let's refer back to when Donald Trump was held in contempt 10 times over in the New York State court trial by Judge Merchan. What did he do? He gave Donald Trump and his lawyers an opportunity of notice that this is going to happen, an opportunity to be heard, make whatever arguments you want to make. And then he held him in contempt of court 10 flippin' times and fined him. That was civil contempt, not criminal contempt. But it's the same process that these Trump DOJ officials will go through. They'll have notice, they'll have opportunity to be heard, and it's kind of a summary proceeding, but ultimately the court can conclude that they are in contempt, they intentionally violated court orders, and then the question is, what is the sanction? And Brian, it can absolutely include confinement, a term in jail. Now, here is the thing that I would love to see happen, but I certainly can't tell our viewers it will happen. You know, if you order that the Trump administration officials who are responsible for violating the court order and by extension violating the constitutional rights of these Venezuelan immigrants, if you sentence them to a period in jail, however, you figuratively give them the keys to the cell and say, you can purge the contempt, you can unlock your own cell door, all you have to do is arrange to have the Trump administration return the people who were unconstitutionally deported, contempt sentence complete. I don't know that that will happen. There are lots of potential procedural impediments to that. I just want to throw it out as kind of the most potentially aggressive stance that a judge could take to try to urge a lawless administration to come in compliance with the law.
Not to throw cold water onto that, but didn't the Supreme Court give Trump the keys to be able to pardon anybody who was federally charged with a crime? And so Trump has carte blanche to basically say anybody who does something, who incurs any charges, I can just go ahead and pardon them, and my power to do so is unlimited.
Yeah, so we're going back to the absolute immunity ruling by the Supreme Court, which was horrific and frankly unconstitutional because it contradicts the very language of the Constitution. But you're exactly right. So let's play that out. Let's assume that the courts are prepared to extend the pardon power even to a president who wants to pardon somebody for intentionally violating court orders because ultimately they didn't want to comply with the court orders because they wanted to violate the constitutional rights of others. There's kind of constitutional insult added to constitutional injury there, right? Let's assume that courts will say, you know what? It all falls under the umbrella of absolute immunity. We're not going to say that there's anything wrong or unconstitutional about it. Though the Supreme Court ultimately they might carve out a niche. They have the power and the authority to do it for the pardon power not being able to be used to excuse or wipe the slate clean when people are violating court orders. And frankly, the Supreme Court actually has an institutional interest in making sure that judicial court orders are complied with, and if there's not, there's a sanction. But here's the other thing, Brian. This issue could actually bubble up to the Supreme Court if Donald Trump deigns to pardon a whole bunch of guilty administration officials who defied court orders. That could inspire the Supreme Court to revisit the presidential immunity ruling, acknowledging that they kind of see the Frankenstein monster of a president they have created. It would give them a perfect legal vehicle to revisit the wisdom of that ill-advised ruling. I'm not saying they will, but boy, they certainly could. And if they're ever going to do it, that would be the perfect moment to do it.
Well, look, this is, as I mentioned in the beginning, the case that all eyes are on across the country right now. So we will continue to keep an eye on Judge Boasberg and what happens as it relates to his hostile interaction with the DOJ. So for those who are watching right now, if you want to follow along, please make sure to subscribe. That's also the best way to support our work and independent media more broadly. I'm Brian Taylor Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.